Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to have you here. Sorry for the very late notice on this one. I was not sure with the way my day was going if I would have time to put together some of the information for today's video. And so I didn't want to put it out there unless I knew for sure I could do it. And well, we're at that point now. So let's go ahead and dive right into things here. As you get logged in and start seeing the stream, absolutely chime in. Let me know you're here. Let's go ahead and get going here. Now, we're going to start off with some information out of Kerch and Crimea. The SBU conducted a complex operation to disrupt Russian military logistics in Crimea from the Kiev Post. Kiev Post sources report that Ukrainian Defense Forces, along with Ukraine's security service, conducted a several-day operation to disrupt the logistics supporting the operation of Russian troops in Crimea. According to preliminary information, a complex strike was made on substation and power supply networks, as well as stocks of light oil products in Russia's Krasnodar region. They also explained that they launched attacks on the two ferries that we discussed in the previous video, and the port that was associated with it, and of course the power stations and the other oil facilities over in Krasnodar area would be the other part of this whole situation. Now, there's not a lot new here, but one of the things that kind of popped up as interesting was about an hour before the attack was launched, an American Global Hawk drone actually made its closest approach to Russia's border. So interesting to say the least, but according to everything I saw, despite the hype about this drone seeing the entire attack taking place, it was not directly over the attack at the time when the attack was carried out. It was already about an hour after it had left the area, according to this information here, but it could have still been close enough to intercept some of the signals intelligence or to pass some of the information before the attack itself. Hi, Al. Glad to have you here. Always glad to have you on board. Now, they do show the flight path and all that kind of stuff for this, but in the end, it still comes down to that there was a combination kamikaze boat raid, ATACMS missile raid, and on air defenses protecting the Kerch Strait, and then Ukrainian drones hit the other side of the Kerch Strait, the port system of the Kerch Strait. So it took out ferries, took out port facilities, and took out oil facilities on both ends. So very detailed attack here. This is just a quick overview by Null Reports showing all of the significant attacks that have happened in Crimea over the just in 2024 alone. So I'm going to post that right here because it is an interesting infographic. And if you want to take a closer look at it, it's fascinating to see all of the significant attacks that have been carried out on Crimea in just this year. Here's video of the oil depot that's near the Kerch Bridge. This would be in Krasnodar Krai, in the area across the Kerch Strait. There are 3 tanks on fire. I believe I've got a follow-up report showing the damage. I have to admit, these are such impressive visual explosions here. That oil terminal really went up something fierce. Well, Lucille, glad to have you on board as well. Again, I'm glad I beat your bedtime. And let me tell you, over here, it was a tight thing about whether I'd have the time and energy tonight to do this stream. So I'm just pulling it off at the last second. So I appreciate you guys jumping in. Here's the satellite images on that oil terminal in Kavkaz. It shows the ones that were damaged. You can see some darkened area around these 3 in particular, and this something right here also burned. So that's 3 oil storage facilities at this port. The Ukrainians also attacked the electrical substation supplying Crimea and caused some significant issues there. I wouldn't call that a destruction, but it was basically part of what was supplying Crimea with power from the Russian territory. Meanwhile, during the attack, of course, Russia closed the Kerch Bridge, and now they've started lining up even more buoys and barges nearby to prevent an attack from the sea. And the more they put right here, the harder it is for them to actually use the Kerch Strait for its intended purpose. Really, they're going to close it themselves at this rate. Jerry, glad to have you here as well. And this is just an ongoing, every time we turn around, they add a few more of these barges and other things around it. It's becoming a money sink for Russia, is effectively what it comes down to. The Kerch ferry itself has been suspended until further notice, and of course, this doesn't say exactly why. They have the two railway ferries, Avantgarde and Conroe Trader, two small auto ferries, Kerchinsky 2, Yesk, and three large automobile ferries, Lavrenti, Maria, and Panagia. And this says the Yesk ferry is undergoing scheduled repairs. Now, of course, overall, the ferry crossing is usually only operated in daylight hours, and even then, it can be shut down for weather reasons. However, they've got, according to the Russians, they have lots of ferries. The only reason they shut this down is if they no longer had lots of ferries. Just saying. Overall, they report that the port was hit by 8 Ukrainian-made missiles. Now, the Russians reported it was ATACMS. However, this is, I believe, referring to the oil terminal and the port of Kavkaz over in the Krasnodar Krai territory, not the Kerch side over in Crimea. So the attacks on that oil terminal and the associated ferries on that side of the strait were carried out with Ukrainian-made Neptune missiles, not American-made ATACMS. Russia, of course, gets kind of sick and tired of this, so they launched a massive attack of 50 different types of missiles and 50 Shahed drones, targeting primarily energy infrastructure, with 2 thermal power plants seriously damaged. This is the 6th massive attack on Ukrainian thermal power plants in just 2.5 months. And to be brutally honest, I'm going to just put it as simple as I can here. It's what's left of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is struggling. Now, they can still import power from outside of the country, and they are. And they still have, apparently, the power distribution facilities to be able to carry things out. But they can't import enough power to successfully run their industry while also handling everything else that's going on. So I think I got a few more on that, on the power situation over there. We'll get to that when we get to those updates. From Igor Sushko, realize the scale of Ukrainian heroism. That in red, that's Russia. This teeny tiny yellow dot right here, that's Ukraine. In a relatively to scale map. From the issue for the study of war, they talk about the energy infrastructure attack carried out on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The Russian forces conducted a large-scale drone and missile strike, mainly targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure on the night of May 31st to June 1st. They talk about all the different missiles and types used for it. And they actually state they believe it is in order to exhaust Ukraine's air defense assets. That's half the reason to use the Shahed drones, is that it means that Ukraine has to continue to use even more of their air defense assets. Now, the Shahed drones can be relatively, I'm going to put that in quotes, easily defended against with M2 Brownings and 20 millimeter cannons. But they still, that doesn't mean they're going to have those, air defense assets of that type along the approaches that the Shahed drones are using. So the more they attack, the more that Ukraine has to use up its air defense missiles. 75 prisoners of war were released and returned to Ukraine. I believe it was a two-way swap, with 75 Russian prisoners being sent to Russia as well. I have some more on this later, especially about one particular individual, but just if you look carefully, you'll realize exactly how thin and wasted many of these men are. Just pointing that out. Russia still hasn't marched any forces into Sumy, but they continue to do the old will they, won't they, and launch attacks on border communities and stuff like that into Sumy. Obviously, they're hoping to divide Ukraine's forces even further if they can. And there's some indications that to a certain extent, it may be working, though not maybe as well as Russia had hoped. Already talked about the large-scale attack. This is Ukraine's largest hydroelectric power plant. They now report that it is in a critical state following a Russian strike and is no longer actually producing power. The overall situation, they've even blocked traffic across the dam. That would probably indicate significant structural damage to the facility itself. And they are not sure overall how it's going to do and whether it's going to last. In addition, there have been massive forest fires in Kharkiv Oblast, consuming more than 9,140 acres of forest. That's just one more problem that Ukraine's going to have to deal with as they get the opportunity. It's pretty tough to deal with, but at least if it's on fire, it's unlikely the Russians are going to try and walk through it. Then again, they walked through the Chernobyl voluntarily and then tried to dig trenches there too. So, I'm not going to put it past the Russians. Now, I did mention in the previous video that the book printing place in Kharkiv was attacked and heavily damaged / destroyed, destroying about 80% of the books that were in storage at the location. Some of them priceless artifacts that are unique. However, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation will finance the restoration of Kharkiv-based Factor Druk printing house, which was destroyed in that attack. Now, if you'll remember, I did a brief piece on Howard Buffett and him investing his own time, his own money, and his own resources into Ukraine. Yes, son of Warren Buffett, but it's clear that he has invested himself in Ukraine. And this is one other way of showing that that enormous investment he has of his heart and his resources into Ukraine itself. Not all big rich people are bad people, just going to say. As Ukraine is having additional power issues, we're seeing internet connectivity in Ukraine drop. They're doing new power outages for industrial and household consumers with the ongoing attacks and the weather conditions. That's been going on since March. They're now finally at the point where they're not able to bring in enough power to truly keep everybody going. So different parts of the country are having to deal with temporary power outages in order to be able to keep the whole system from collapsing. Let's move on to Russia. Now, I'm going to start with the Ministry of Defense of the UK's intelligence update. The total number of Russian casualties, which includes killed and wounded since the start of the war in February 2022, has now likely reached 500,000. Now, I want to clarify something. Typically, they run this number as wounded who are unlikely to be able to return to the front, missing body parts or, significant other issues, ongoing medical issues that are left over from their injuries. By and large, this is not somebody who's, got a little scrape and has to put a Band-Aid on. So this would be typically 500,000 people that are not able to return to the war for various reasons. That said, don't put it past the Russians. A Russian soldier who lost both of his legs was sent back to the front line in Ukraine from a Moscow hospital, and this was so that he could finish serving out his term of service. Now, I don't have this confirmed by anything else other than this one video, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were going to probably do what the Ukrainians have been doing, which is if their soldiers have the ability to handle other things, logistics or paperwork or assembling drones or things like that, they keep those soldiers in service for those purposes, obviously not sending them back to the front line with no legs. But interesting. Anyway, the elevated casualty rate is highly likely a reflection of Russia's ongoing attritional offensive, which is being conducted across a wide front. So we're seeing Russians attempting various offensives both in the east and in the south, and in Kharkiv, trying to turn things around. There's been some good news in Kharkiv, not some bad news in, well, some expected news over in the east, and no news actually down in the south. So we'll talk about all that. Russia continues to recruit additional forces to sustain this approach. However, the need to continuously replenish frontline personnel will almost certainly continue to limit Russia's ability to generate higher capability units. Basically, the losses are having a toll on their ability to train and maintain a highly effective fighting force. Now, over in Ryazan, armed people stormed the Ryazvetment plant, which is a metal refinery plant, and they just basically some armed people come sweeping in and break through the fence with a tractor, and they don't know exactly who they are. That's just that it's basically a raider takeover. In fact, here is some video of that happening. You can barely see it through this very dirty window. An unknown group of armed mercenaries is storming the metals factory Ryazvetmet in Ryazan. They broke through the gate with a bulldozer and threw smoke grenades. I guess some of that's probably smoke. But this is an armed takeover of a manufacturing plant in Russia. This isn't near the front lines. This isn't Ukrainian troops. This is some armed force of mercenaries causing havoc in Russia itself. Interesting. Russians bombed Belgorod one more time, 3 more fab bombs in the last 2 days. And that means 78 times the Russians have bombed their own territory since the start of the year. Now, this one, I don't have a whole lot more context on, and I'm going to just put that out there first. According to Astra, typically a valid and capable news organization, a drone flew into a residential building in Belgorod, according to local Telegram channels. They weren't able to report whose drone, how it happened, injuries, deaths, anything. But you can see the building itself does have damage on the front here and about the 1, 2, 3, 4th floor, and the 5th floor as well. So whatever this was, it's something to keep an eye on. Belgorod might be finding out they don't like being that close to the Ukrainian front lines. 29 coal cars derailed in the Amur region of Russia. This is on the Transbaikal Railway in the Shimanovsky district of the Amur region. This is a fairly significant supply line throughout Russia, so I think that having it blocked even temporarily will cause some additional supply and logistics problems for Russia. Now, we've already noted in previous videos that the Russians have basically abandoned Sevastopol Bay. They weren't able to completely because Novorossiysk doesn't have the large vessel repair facilities that Sevastopol has. But they were looking at planning at actually transferring the floating dry docks from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. However, there is a catch, specifically that these docks probably wouldn't make it there because they're in bad condition. They're dilapidated. Using in a fixed position, not such a big deal, but moving them 400 kilometers away over to Novorossiysk in a questionable thing in open waters, maybe not exactly the most robust plan ever. So they're not even sure that, like, for instance, they had that one ship that bailed out of Novorossiysk, didn't make it, bailed out of Sevastopol, didn't make it all the way to Novorossiysk, and ended up stopping in Feodosia in order to get some more repairs. These may not even make it if they try. So the new, as Dmitry at War Translated says, non-corrupt, honest Russian Minister of Defense says that Ukraine lost 35,000 people in May, in addition to 290 tanks and hundreds of other equipment. And, well, 290 tanks is absurd. Number one, there'd be a ton of photographic evidence of that 35,000 people, I don't find likely. I am not sure I'm quite on board with Ukraine's estimates of their losses either. But they are calling 1 in 8, and 35,000 is almost the exact number that Ukraine says they killed of Russians. So this guy is apparently just taking the Ukrainian numbers and moving over to the Russian column so that it looks like they're not in as bad a shape as they would be. But then again, 290 tanks, there'd be so much photographic evidence of that. There's no aspect of this war that doesn't get photographed somehow or another, it feels like these days. And even though there's some amazing open source researchers who go through and identify and count and figure out who lost each and every piece of equipment, and it's just not, it's not a realistic number. Now, the Ukrainians have been on defense primarily. 35,000 people in a month is also not realistic, though I'm not going to say what I think that would be because I don't have a good feel for it. Another Ukrainian Shahed drone lookalike flew all the way to Tatarstan this morning, covering a distance of over more than 1,000 kilometers. They were aiming at a local synthetics plant, but were intercepted. So it's clear that Russians don't have control of their own airspace. They just don't. I mean, that's 1,000 kilometers. That's 600 miles deep into Russia. And we already talked about this, of course. So let's go ahead and move on to the international front here. And I'm kind of working my way through things in a hurry. If you have questions and comments, please pipe up, let me know, make them in the comments. I will be watching for it, and I'm appreciating every bit of your guys' comments so far. So let's see. Ukraine is now allowed to strike within Russia, but not with ATACMS, according to Knoll reports on the U.S. decision. We got a little bit more detail on that as well. They can use HIMARS, MLRS, and GMLRS rocket systems and artillery, but long-range ATACMS missiles remain prohibited. So the shorter-range HIMARS missiles that go into the HIMARS launcher, all approved, which gives it a relatively short range, comparatively speaking. Still plenty of range to carry out to stop Russians from crossing the border and engage and interdict supply lines across the border as well. According to Politico and CNN, coming from Crimean Wind, Ukraine can conduct counter-battery fire, including with MLRS and HIMARS, intercept Russian missiles over Russian territory. That's a big one right there. Intercept Russian aviation, also a big one right there. Strike at Russian troop assembly points directly near the border with Ukraine, so that keeps them from going across into Kharkiv. Strike Russian ammunition depots and logistics centers with artillery and missiles across the border. Wise. That's a pretty decent package. However, no long-range deep strikes with ATACMS missiles into the Russian Federation, or strike at Russian aircraft on the ground with American equipment. So they can certainly still keep using their drones to attack Russian airfields, but no using ATACMS to attack Russian airfields while the planes are on the ground. Now, just going to point out, if you can get them when they're, kind of after their takeoff roll, I don't know. Just say it. That'd be more entertaining, at least. And of course, they can't attack civilian infrastructure, which probably also applies to dual use infrastructure. So no power plants, no power stations, no, normal manufacturing plants that aren't building, just military goods. Probably Ukraine's going to interpret that as no manufacturing plants at all, just to be extra cautious. But, that's the type of things that they can and can't do with the this new permission. A lot more generous than I expected, honestly. I just the initial reports were that it was a very limited, but that's not bad. Not amazing, but not bad at all. Germany is also allowing Ukraine to strike within Russia, but only in the Kharkiv border area. Not a surprise. That's where that's the biggest problem right now. However, a group of Republican congressmen released a letter saying this is just a half measure and to fully lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons against Russian territory. They did confirm the lifting of the ban. However, the kind of the overall situation I just mentioned just a moment ago about using it primarily against targets right across from Kharkiv, no deep strikes, that type of stuff. Still, on the night when they reported that they were allowed to start using American and Western weapons, the Ukrainian forces, according to Russian state news agency TASS, mounted a large-scale missile attack into Russia's Belgorod Oblast overnight, just across from the border onto the border with Kharkiv, exactly within their parameters. So they looked at the parameters, they said, okay, here's my list of targets, and they went, dumped a whole bunch of stuff right onto Belgorod Oblast, not the city, just so we're clear. I wish they'd stop naming their stuff the same things. It's really annoying. It'd be like a Springfield in America. You know what I'm saying? Of course, once they all announced that, yes, you can use Western weapons to strike into Russia, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev once again threatened the West with the use of nuclear weapons, stating that it is not a bluff. He warned of the escalating conflict with NATO and the possibility of the conflict reaching its final stage due to increasing NATO weaponry in Ukraine. This is the normal pattern for Russia. Now, this one, I'm not quite sure how to take just yet. Warsaw considers forming a unit of draft-aged Ukrainians living in Poland. Now, I did read this article through, and it looks like they're looking at it as the alternative to sending training instructors into Ukraine itself. Instead, they would take basically draft-age young men that are Ukrainians living in Poland and start forming units and training them in Poland. Interesting. It's definitely a thought process, and if they can do it successfully, it would be a pretty big plus for Ukraine. But if they're already in Poland, what are the odds that they're going to be running back to Ukraine? Just saying. I don't know how to feel about it just yet. Just understand that's the initiative they're looking at. The Moldovan parliament adopted a declaration on May 30th condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine as genocide, specifically because of the forced deportation of Ukrainian children. Moldova is looking at the situation in Ukraine, and they're going, oh, my heavens, we're next. And they are, because once Russia gets through Ukraine, they get right up to Transnistria. And that whole situation changes enormously. The whole balance over there, gone. Because now Russia would have a direct supply line straight to Transnistria, and therefore straight into Moldova. So Moldova's looking at the situation. They're going, not that good. Definitely not that good. Don't want to be messing around with that. We want to make sure Russia stays as far from us as possible. There was a native of Chechnya, who is, of course, now part of the Russian Federation, who was preparing a terrorist attack at the Olympics in France. This 18-year-old, they call him a boy, but 18, he's an adult, is accused of planning attacks on groups of spectators at sporting events that will take place in Saint-Étienne during Olympic Games. He arrived with his parents in 2023. They found photographs of the stadium. He denied all the charges, and they suspect him of being radicalized by Russian forces. Any military aficionados, military history buffs out there should probably be well aware of what's coming up on June 6th, the 80th anniversary of the Allied landings in Normandy. Enormous event, D-Day. Two senior European diplomats told Reuters on condition of anonymity that Russia has been invited to not attend this particular commemoration of it. And they say that the presence of Russian President Vladimir Putin would be undesirable, but they did hedge their bets in April, saying that some Russian representatives could be invited to note the Russians' contribution to the victory in World War II and honor the memory of fallen Soviet soldiers. However, they've now backed off on that and said, not so much. So they're expecting Zelensky and Biden, but no Russian delegation. And from journalist Jason J. Smart, China has allowed Russia to accelerate its own production of tanks, missiles, and shells. 70% of the machine tools Russia is currently using are imported from China. 90% of the microelectronics are imported from China. As he says, it's free world versus tyrants. We're really drawing the lines, aren't we? It's going to be a bright line. You're going to know which side you're on, one way or another. It's hard to sit on the fence nowadays. Let's go ahead and move on to the situation on the front lines. Now, there were some updates today. They're all kind of teeny tiny ones, at least as I recall. Over here near Solovyove, had a chunk of open territory captured up to the next tree line. This one's probably the bigger one here. It's got a series of tree lines that were captured. My guess is it's probably old information finally catching up. Near Nestryanka, it's kind of a couple of little, again, tree lines. They're pushing like they're being paid by the millimeter, okay? That's really what it comes down to. And they don't care if they capture cities or countryside when they're doing that. Now, the situation near Chasiv Yar, which is kind of where we're at right now, is not as bad as it could be, but continuing to deteriorate as things continue on. This is really where Russia is pushing at this point after the effective ending. Well, not ending is the wrong word, but the fact that their Kharkiv offensive didn't really put in the numbers they were expecting to get. After 1.5 weeks of inactivity and regrouping, Russians have restarted operations from Lvov towards Lipsy. This is over in the Kharkiv region with no map changes in that area. But Russian channels have been reporting about Ukrainian counterattacks and a bogged-down offensive on their own part. Is the situation shifting? And let me see if I can, let's see, they don't have the translations here. Whereas a Ukrainian spokesman, let's see, there we go. In the Kharkiv region, the picture is generally improving in our favor, according to the Ukrainians. I told you, the guys have a lot of ammo on HIMARS and different rockets. Magyar, that's their drone crew, has pulled up in the direction, and these are not only effective FPV drone crews, but also powerful electronic warfare systems. So things are turning in Kharkiv, and it looks like it's turning very favorable for Ukraine at the moment. Even Vovchansk, where previously they stated that Ukraine was only controlling about 60%, they now report that Ukraine's controlling about 70% of Vovchansk, which means in this context, pretty small areas are being recaptured in the city. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you over here. You're just in time to hear what's going on over in Kharkiv area. And so this is kind of giving us a picture of an improving situation for Ukraine in Kharkiv, where they're gradually starting to push the Russians back, recapture lost territory, and gradually push them just a little bit farther back each time. The effectiveness of being able to use Western equipment and supplies is making all the difference on the battlefield. And that's what we're seeing happen right now. The Ukrainians can do the fighting, they can do the shooting, they can do all the nasty business of it. They just need stuff to shoot. And I don't mean enemies. They got plenty of those. I'm talking about things to shoot at their enemies. Russians have managed to advance east of Chasiv Yar into Kalinivka, but were partially repelled. An assault group on MTLBs were taken out. Now, the MTLB is, as I recall, is one of the older armored personnel carriers. But this is definitely indicating that the Russians are still pushing hard in this area. Really, most of their mechanized equipment is over in this Chasiv Yar area and other parts of the east, which tells me their focus went from Kharkiv and they've moved it over to this area instead. kind of proven by the fact that there's really not been a lot of mechanized equipment in the Kharkiv area for the Russians. Additional advances on the south end of that as well. So this is just basically, they're trying to fight their way into Chasiv Yar through these dense forest strips, but no major changes expected coming. And then we go over to the Russian point of view, and really it kind of matches what we got. In Zaporizhia front and Robotina area, no significant changes. They do report getting the settlement of Mirnoye. I have not seen that confirmed anywhere else, but it could also be true. I don't have a problem believing it possible. Donetsk front, that's all the eastern side over there. The Russians are continuing to push into Krasnodarivka and Netolovo and Karlivka. And they say they have tactical successes. That's what these small little nibbles are. So overall, we're seeing the Russians kind of have the initiative over on Donetsk, but it's rough fighting for them there. Chasiv Yar, we've already mentioned, they did make an advance in that area. And Kharkiv, even the Russians are acknowledging no changes, with heavy fighting continuing in the central part of Volchansk. And that's a situation on the front lines. I mean, really, that's the long and the short of it. A lot of heavy fighting. I mean, I hate to say that every single time, but tons of heavy fighting going on. It's just a hard slog keeping the Russians back. So let's go ahead and move on to the interesting extras. And this is that group of 75 Ukrainians that were returned from Russian captivity. They are kissing the ground. And somewhere in here, I don't remember where, there is a rainbow. Quite the emotional time for these returning warriors. In this group is a female law enforcement officer who was not allowed to evacuate from Azovstal steel plant because she was a cop. She's in here. This is what she looks like. This is Mariana Chechelyek, who just returned home from Russian captivity. They went to Azovstal at the end of March 2022. They were there through the whole thing. And when the Russians opened that green corridor for civilians, she was not allowed through because she was a cop. She did endure starvation and torture in her time there. You can see what she looked like before, and she's thinner now. But still, during her time in captivity, she wrote a poem, and I'm really can't do this justice, so I'm going to just hit play, and you can read it. It's about 57 seconds here.
Але завжди була не я. Нема в мене слів, щоб передати страждання. Немає і віри, що скінчиться все. Нема в мене сили терпіти знущання. Немає надії, що Україна спасе. Може, повернусь до тебе, мамо? Ні, я повернусь до тебе, чуєш? Я прийду на світанку, рано. Серце своїм ти мене відчуєш. Закричу, що я вільна, назавжди. Що сумувала за татком та домом. Мамо, я пам'ятатиму завжди, що цей жах зветься руським полоном.
And that's Mariana's own words on that. And here she is when she gets the chance to actually call home. See, I've managed to get the audio turned back on. So.
Алло. Алло. Мама, привет. Мамочка, я дома. Я дома. Я дома, мама. Дякую, мама, що чекала на мене. Що не покинула.
ці 2 роки я вже...
Лилочка тоже вот плачет, да Фузя, он трясется.
Як там бабушка?
Ай, такой голос, а где Марьяна? Вон она, вон там, вон она, сидит тебя. Да, дочечка, я очень рада тебе, солнышко, что ты наконец-то уже на территории Украины, моя гусеничка.
Quite the emotional moment there. I can't do this one justice, just really. Those, by the way, that was from Anton Herischenko with the subtitles, so thank you to him for providing that that additional service. He mentioned a while back that he wasn't sure he was doing good helping out, and I responded to him that he provided a view into the personal effects of this war. Nobody else really captures the soul of what's going on in Ukraine quite like Mr. Herischenko does. Not related to the Ukraine war, but I think it's something that shows the impact overall. In Tbilisi, unknown persons, quote, attacked the office of the opposition party. On the night of June 1st, unknown persons broke a window in the office of the Georgian United National Movement Party and damaged equipment. The party reports that the attackers were masked and armed with wooden spears, sticks, and stones. They believe it was done by the ruling Georgian Dream Party, who is Russian-supported and Russian-backed. And they believe it was a targeted attack in this regard. This is what people over in Georgia and in the rough parts of Europe are having to deal with on a daily basis, having their voices violently suppressed. In the end, they're fighting to try and save their freedom. So here's one of them. In fact, here's the man that's responsible for it all, really. This is the young Vladimir Putin. Hard to believe that what he became. I also thought this launch video of attackers was really good. That's probably copyrighted music, so I'll mute that. It's not the same as the launches of the Gimler's missiles, but quite the visual. If anybody ever asks, what's Ukraine fighting for? And I definitely have to mute this because it's chock full of copyrighted music. This is what they're fighting for. Returning home to their kids and their wives and their mothers and their fathers, their pets. They're fighting for freedom and they're fighting for family. And this is one of the causes that's worth fighting for. Home, family, freedom. Fighting over capturing somebody else's stuff and land, that's not a just cause. Fighting to save your homes, your lands, and your freedoms. And the freedoms of those who have fallen under the oppression of the Russian government or other oppressive regimes elsewhere. Those are the things where justice demands action. Now, I know that if I don't show videos of animals at the end, I get all kinds of screaming and yelling at me for not showing something fun. I always mention when I play these videos that how the Ukrainians treat their animals says so much about their heart and their soul. Here are 15 baby goats, the audio here, that are being evacuated from Vovchansk, Kharkiv region. 15 goats and baby goats. They'll be transported by volunteers to the west of Ukraine where they'll be safe and cared for overall. And it might not be as cute as a kitten, but the heart and the spirit is right there. Taking care of those who don't have the ability to take care of themselves. And that's how you tell the soul of a people. And on that note, thank you for joining me today. I do appreciate having you here. It's a little bit shorter today. Well, actually, no, it's about an hour, almost dead. Well, 45 minutes. Let's be fair. But I want you to know I appreciate all of you being here. And I hope you find the information that I suss out and find. I hope you find it useful and helpful in understanding what's going on in Ukraine. If you do appreciate what I do, hit me with that old thumbs up button. And, I think everybody here is a subscriber already, but if you're not, hit that subscribe button as well. And you might want to hit that notification because I do these live streams several times a week. And I do release occasional videos on U.S. politics and national, international politics. But more than anything else, I just appreciate having all of you here to be part of this little family we've got going on. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.